Britain's most trusted politician just became its most controversial. In less than 48 hours, Keir Starmer went from Prime Minister in waiting to a man facing calls for criminal investigation. This is the scandal that's tearing the Labour Party apart from the inside. It started with a leak that blindsided everyone. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, as news cameras rolled and anchors read through routine political updates, a bombshell report hit live television. Documents surfaced linking Keir Starmer directly to a £4 million hedge fund donation, money that came from the very financial institutions Labour voters spent years protesting against. These weren't just any hedge funds. According to the leaked papers, these financial players had deep ties to the institutions blamed for Britain's economic collapse, for years of brutal austerity, for the devastation of working-class communities from Newcastle to Cornwall. The same people Labour built its identity opposing were quietly funding its leader. Within minutes, social media detonated. #Starmer exposed, #resign now and Labour betrayal began trending across the UK. Twitter erupted with thousands of posts from furious voters demanding answers. The shock wasn't just that the donation existed, it was that it had been hidden so carefully for so long. And if you think that's explosive, what comes next will shock you even more. This story is unravelling by the hour, with new leaks dropping daily. Hit subscribe right now because you need to see where this goes. And trust me, it gets worse. This wasn't some innocent one-time donation that slipped through the cracks. The leaked documents paint a far more troubling picture, a pattern of secret coordination between Starmer's inner circle and hedge fund representatives stretching back over 12 months. Multiple private meetings, closed-door conversations, financial arrangements structured to avoid public scrutiny, all happening while Starmer toured factories in the Midlands, stood alongside union workers in the North and delivered passionate speeches about economic justice and standing up to the wealthy elite. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. On camera, he was the people's champion. Behind the scenes, his campaign infrastructure was being underwritten by millionaires whose business interests directly conflicted with Labour's stated mission. For Labour activists, the volunteers who knocked on doors in the rain, who organised community meetings, who donated what little they could afford, this revelation feels like a knife in the back. These were the people who believed Starmer represented a clean break from political corruption, who saw him as the steady, principled leader who would finally restore integrity to the party. One long-time Labour organiser, a woman who'd been active since the Blair years, summed up the betrayal. "We didn't spend years rebuilding this party from the ground up just to watch it get auctioned off to the same people who destroyed working communities in the first place." And she's not alone. Across the country, constituency Labour parties are holding emergency meetings. Local councillors are fielding angry phone calls from constituents demanding explanations they can't provide. The grassroots network that powered Labour's resurgence is fracturing in real time. But here's where the story transforms from a political scandal into something potentially criminal. Just as the hedge fund revelations were dominating headlines, a second bombshell dropped, one that makes the first look almost insignificant by comparison. A leaked internal memo from the Treasury exposed a catastrophic £22 billion gap in Labour's public spending proposals. £22 billion vanished into thin air with no credible explanation for where it went or how it disappeared. Let that number sink in for a moment. £22 billion isn't a rounding error. It's not a minor accounting discrepancy. It's a sum larger than the annual GDP of some nations. And somehow it's missing from Labour's carefully crafted economic blueprint. At first, Labour's response was to downplay it. They called it a technical oversight, suggesting it was merely a miscalculation in complex financial modelling. But as investigative journalists began pulling threads, that explanation collapsed under scrutiny. Economic analysts from across the political spectrum, left, right and centre, examined the numbers and reached the same conclusion. This wasn't an innocent mistake. The funding projections for Labour's signature policies, NHS expansion, green energy transformation, infrastructure modernisation, were built on financial foundations that simply don't exist. Government watchdogs raised red flags. Independent auditors questioned the methodology. Even former Labour economic advisers, people who had worked closely with the party for years, began speaking out publicly about their concerns. One senior economist put it bluntly on national television: "These numbers don't just fail to add up, they appear to have been deliberately obfuscated. Someone knew this wouldn't withstand scrutiny, and they tried to bury it in complexity." The implications are staggering. If Labour's entire economic platform was built on false projections, then every promise Starmer made, from saving the NHS to tackling climate change, was essentially a fiction. Voters weren't being offered a realistic policy agenda. They were being sold a fantasy constructed on numbers that never existed. Opposition leaders pounced immediately. Conservative MPs began calling it the biggest con in Labour history. One senior Tory MP declared during a heated Commons exchange: "If a company CEO presented financials like this to shareholders, they'd be arrested for fraud. Why should a political party be held to a lower standard?" But the most damaging criticism came from within Labour itself. Backbench MPs, already rattled by the hedge fund revelations, began expressing serious doubts about Starmer's leadership. Anonymous briefings to journalists revealed deep unease among the parliamentary party. One Labour MP was quoted saying, "We can't go into a general election with this hanging over us. Every promise we make will be met with mockery. Every policy we propose will be dismissed as more dodgy math. He's turned us into a laughingstock." And then came the moment that transformed this from a political crisis into a potential legal nightmare. Senior barristers and legal experts began publicly discussing whether Starmer's actions might constitute criminal fraud. One prominent QC specialising in financial crime laid out the case on a primetime news programme. If it can be proven that these financial projections were knowingly falsified, or that donor relationships were deliberately concealed to mislead voters about funding sources, we're looking at potential charges of fraud by false representation, possibly even money laundering if donor funds were misused. Suddenly, hashtags weren't just calling for resignation. #ArrestStarmer began trending. Public petitions demanding a criminal investigation exploded past 1 million signatures within 48 hours. The question shifted from will Starmer survive politically to could Starmer face prison time? Parliament came under intense pressure to act. Opposition parties formally requested a full independent inquiry into Labour's finances. Some MPs called for the Serious Fraud Office to get involved. The Metropolitan Police, already under fire for perceived selective prosecution of political figures, found itself under scrutiny for its apparent inaction. Civil liberties groups, typically defenders of due process and presumption of innocence, found themselves in an uncomfortable position. On one hand, they opposed mob justice and trial by media. On the other, the public anger was so intense and the allegations so serious that calls for formal investigation seemed entirely legitimate. What happened next caught even seasoned political observers off guard. The backlash wasn't just angry, it was visceral, sustained, and nationwide. Within 72 hours of the financial scandal breaking, new polling showed Starmer's approval rating in absolute freefall. Among all voters, his net favourability dropped 18 points, the steepest decline ever recorded for a Labour leader outside of wartime. But the truly catastrophic numbers came from Labour's core demographics. Among voters aged 18 to 34, Starmer's support collapsed by 26 points. A quarter of his youth base evaporated in 3 days. A flash poll of Labour members, the people who literally pay party dues, showed 58% wanted him to resign immediately, with another 23% saying he should step down before the next election. These weren't marginal Labour supporters or fair weather voters. These were the true believers, the activists, the small dollar donors who kept the party financially solvent. And they were abandoning ship. Social media became a 24/7 outrage machine. Video compilations of Starmer's past promises played alongside clips of the scandal revelations, racking up millions of views. Memes mocking the 22 billion question mark went viral. TikTok creators, many of them first-time voters, posted emotional videos about feeling betrayed by the only party they'd ever trusted. But the digital anger soon manifested in physical spaces. In Liverpool, where Labour had dominated local politics for generations, Protesters gathered outside the regional party headquarters with signs reading, "Where's our £22 billion, Keir?" and hedge fund Labour. Manchester saw similar scenes. Birmingham, Sheffield, Leeds, Bristol. Even in traditional Labour strongholds where challenging the party was almost taboo, grassroots activists publicly broke ranks. One of protest in Glasgow featured a particularly symbolic moment. Long-time Labour campaigners ritually tearing up their membership cards on camera, posting the videos with messages like, "I didn't spend 30 years fighting for workers' rights to see this party become what we fought against." Town hall meetings became confrontational. Labour MPs returning to their constituencies for scheduled surgeries faced hostile crowds demanding answers they couldn't provide. Some MPs stopped holding public events altogether, citing security concerns, but really just trying to avoid the fury. The anger was most pronounced among working-class voters, the demographic Labour claims as its foundation. In post-industrial towns across the Midlands and North, the sense of betrayal ran deep. One voter in a former mining community captured the mood in a clip that went massively viral. "My grandfather was a union man. Fought his whole life for Labour because he believed they stood with people like us. Now I'm watching his party take millions from the same bankers and hedge fund managers who destroyed our community. It's not just disappointing, it's disgusting." While the public turned on Starmer, something even more dangerous was happening inside Labour Party headquarters. The institutional infrastructure was beginning to crumble. Two of Starmer's senior financial advisors resigned within 24 hours of each other, both citing irreconcilable differences in terse public statements. But anonymous briefings to the press told a darker story. One former advisor, speaking on condition of anonymity, told a Guardian journalist, "I couldn't be part of it anymore. What's happening isn't just bad political judgment or sloppy accounting. There are ethical lines being crossed. And I wasn't willing to be complicit." Those words, ethical lines being crossed, sent shockwaves through Westminster. This wasn't vague political criticism. This was a former insider effectively accusing the leadership of wrongdoing serious enough to make them quit. Leaked WhatsApp messages from Labour's private staff channels revealed an organisation in crisis mode. Communications staffers complained about being given contradictory talking points. Policy advisors expressed frustration that questions about the £22 billion were being deflected rather than answered. Junior staffers openly speculated about finding new jobs before the ship goes down completely. Most damning of all, leaked strategy documents showed that Labour's senior leadership team had been wargaming Starmer resignation scenarios for at least a week before any public acknowledgement of the crisis. Internal memos discussed controlled transition messaging and post-Starmer positioning. In other words, Starmer's own team was preparing for his departure, even as he publicly insisted everything was fine. Parliamentary Labour Party meetings became tense, confrontational affairs. Backbenchers who once supported Starmer loyally began asking pointed questions about the timeline of the hedge fund relationship and the origins of the financial projections gap. Shadow cabinet members, bound by collective responsibility, maintained public support but privately expressed serious concerns. One shadow minister was overheard at a Westminster reception saying he's either been incredibly naive or incredibly dishonest. I don't know which is worse. Constituency Labour parties, the local organisations that form the party's democratic backbone, began passing emergency motions of no confidence in Starmer's leadership. These votes, while not binding, carried enormous symbolic weight. Some CLPS went further, threatening to withhold financial contributions to the National Party and refused to campaign for Labour candidates unless Starmer stepped down. In a party chronically short on funds compared to the Conservatives, this was a genuine existential threat. But beyond the immediate political drama, something more profound and more troubling was happening. A generational breaking of faith between young people and democratic politics itself. For many younger voters, Starmer represented a last chance to believe in electoral politics. After Brexit chaos, after Tory austerity, after years of feeling ignored and betrayed by the system, Starmer's Labour offered something that felt different. Competent, principled, trustworthy. And now watching that image disintegrate in real time, many young people aren't just walking away from Labour, they're questioning whether any mainstream political party deserves their trust. One viral TikTok video posted by a 22-year-old first-time voter captured this sentiment perfectly. I was so excited to vote Labour. I actually believed we could make things better. Now I just feel stupid, like I was the joke all along. And the worst part, I don't know who to trust anymore. That video has been viewed over 3 million times. The comment section is filled with similar stories of disillusionment, anger and hopelessness. Youth turnout has always been a challenge in British politics. But this scandal risks creating a lost generation of voters who simply opt out entirely. And once that disengagement sets in, it's incredibly difficult to reverse. Political scientists and sociologists have begun warning about the long-term democratic consequences. When young people stop believing that the system can work for them, they don't just switch parties. They abandon the entire project of democratic participation. Some turn to fringe movements. Others become politically nihilistic. Most just tune out completely, focusing on their personal lives and accepting political corruption as an unchangeable reality. As pressure mounted from all sides, the public, the media, his own party, speculation intensified about when, not if, Starmer would resign. Bookmakers slashed odds on an early leadership challenge from 10 to 1 to 2 to 1 in less than a week. Political betting markets, often more accurate than polls, were pricing in Starmer's departure as increasingly inevitable. Behind the scenes, senior Labour figures began reaching out to potential successors. Angela Rayner's team reported a surge in calls from MPs just checking in. West Streeting was spotted in private meetings with key backbenchers. Even figures previously thought to be long shots, like Lisa and Andy, began receiving feelers about their leadership ambitions. The leadership contest that everyone assumed wouldn't happen until after the next election suddenly felt imminent, and with it came a brutal calculation. Could Labour afford to change leaders now, so close to a general election, or would that look like even more chaos? Some argued that keeping Starmer would be electoral suicide. You can't win an election with a leader who's facing calls for criminal investigation. One former Labour strategist told the BBC. Others countered that a leadership battle would consume months of news cycles, leave the party looking divided and unstable, and hand the Conservatives a massive gift. There were no good options. Every path forward carried enormous risk. What we're witnessing isn't just a political scandal, it's the potential end of a political project that millions of people believed in. Keir Starmer was supposed to be the adult, the prosecutor, the man who would restore competence and integrity after years of chaos. He was supposed to be different. And now, as leaked documents pile up and former allies distance themselves, as protests spread and polls crater, as lawyers discuss criminal charges and party members tear up their cards, now he looks like exactly what he claimed not to be. Just another politician in a suit, just another leader who said one thing in public while doing another in private. Just another disappointment in a political system that seems designed to break people's hearts. The questions keep multiplying. Who authorised the hedge fund meetings? Where did the £22 billion go? Why were insiders silenced? How long has this been happening? And most importantly, what else don't we know? Every day without clear answers deepens the crisis. Every awkward press conference, every non-answer, every leak that contradicts previous statements, they all feed the perception that Starmer is hiding something. His political survival now hangs by the thinnest thread. And with each passing hour, that thread frays a little more. This scandal is far from over. New documents are leaking daily. Insiders are speaking out. The pressure is building toward a breaking point. So here's what I need you to do. Drop your honest verdict in the comments. Should Starmer resign? Should he face criminal investigation? Or is this a media manufactured crisis? I want to hear real opinions, not talking points. And if you want to stay ahead of this story as it unfolds, because trust me, it's going to get even more explosive, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're tracking every leak, every development, every twist in what might become the biggest political scandal in modern British history. This is the reckoning Keir Starmer tried to avoid, and it's just getting started.